Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there, and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 325. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about music and mansions and still more lakes as we go back to the Twin Cities, to St. Paul, and to day trips outside.
One more cafe. I know that I should be heading home, but maybe not today.
Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Before we get back to the second part of that two-part episode with Kirk Horsted about the Twin Cities, I do have three news stories for you. In the first one, a Florida motel has gone all nude. This isn't something that they did for religious reasons or to take a stance on nudity so much as to reinforce, and I quote, the bottom line. And then speaking of people with their eye on the bottom line, or at least on your pockets, Spirit Air has raised the carry-on bag fee to $100. That's right, they will charge you $100 for you to carry your own bag onto the plane. Needless to say, they're trying to discourage you from doing carry-on baggage. You can check the bag. That, of course, will cost you $45. And so if you do fly Spirit Air, make sure that you include the price of luggage as you're thinking about the price of the ticket. And then speaking of flying, a woman was really desperate to catch her flight at the Pittsburgh International Airport, so desperate that she continued driving her car even though she had a flat tire. The problem is that because she was driving on the rim, she damaged the brakes and crashed into the moving walkway of the airport. For links to all three of those stories, check out the show notes at amateurtraveler.com. And now we continue with part two of the interview with Kirk Horsted on the Twin Cities, and that interview is already in progress. This may have just turned into a two-part show, but what is there to see in St. Paul?
In St. Paul, you could easily spend a full day, but I think you would probably want to start downtown, and it's not as large or glamorous a downtown as Minneapolis, and yet it's got a lot more sort of historic and old world things to look at and do. You might want to start somewhere in Rice Park. We are looking at a beautiful old hotel called the St. Paul Hotel that has been there forever, has a wonderful bar and restaurant, and you can walk through the lobby. and get a piece of old world St. Paul. Landmark Center is a castle-like building that you can also walk through and has a musical instrument museum in it and lots of special events and lots of arts organizations and offices are in it, and it's very cool. The Ordway Music Theater is also on that park, and that's worth taking a show in if you're in the mood. And then if you wander around St. Paul, it's not too hard to see in a handful of hours, depending on if you're going to go to one of the many museums. But I would highly recommend that you have lunch in Mickey's Diner if you want a good old-fashioned diner experience. That certainly is historic and open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And that's one of the hangouts of Garrison Keillor and lots of executives and lots of not-so-executives type people, too. So it's a good slice of St. Paul with a very good hamburger, by the way. If you prefer to splurge a little bit, a restaurant practically a block away or less is called Meritage, which is more of a French place that's getting national renown and has great oysters and an oyster bar attached to it. There's a science museum, there's a children's museum, there's a history museum, and then, of course, you mentioned Garrison Keillor earlier, and his theater, as we might refer to it, which is now called the Fitzgerald Theater. It used to be called the World Theater. It's beautifully restored, holds less than 1,000 people, and probably the farthest seat from center stage is less than from home base to first base. So very little intimate old vaudevillian theater. And probably 20, 30 times a week, a Prairie Home Companion is put on there live. And it's not the easiest ticket to get, but they even release some every day of the show. And sometimes there's someone who will be selling some outside because they can't make it. And a Prairie Home Companion is worth planning a trip around. There is no other live radio show going on like it anywhere.
And you said 20 to 30 times a week. I think that was 20 to 30 times a year.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Correct me, thank you. 20 to 30 times a year it's probably at that theater, and then he does several other shows on the road all over the country, even Minneapolis, and once a year probably at the State Fair here. And that show has a radio audience of about 4 million people, and it is a lot of fun to see. You will never forget it. I try to get there every few years myself, and when people visit me, and once in a while just take a group of 18 people and make a night of it. Go somewhere before, go somewhere after. The show runs 5 to 7, so you have plenty of time for dinner afterward. And that theater, the Fitzgerald Theater, has events going on, music and drama, etc.
Well, we should say, if you want to prepare for your trip there, the monologue that is part of the show is actually broadcast as a separate podcast. It's one of the 70 podcasts that I listen to every week about Garrison Keillor's fictional hometown of Lake Wobegon, Minnesota.
That's right, and he also has several books out, so there's lots of ways to prep for that, but the podcast is excellent and a great way to get that monologue, which is probably 20 minutes of the 2-hour show.
And I should say that I did invite Garrison Keillor to be on the show at one point to do an April 1st episode on Lake Wobegon, but that didn't turn out. I don't think our audience was quite large enough at the time that I made the invitation, so...
Well, keep making the invitation, because Garrison is a very busy man, but he does a lot of small things, too. For example, he's opening a bookstore in St. Paul. He's had one for years, but it's been small. Now he's opening a large one called Common Good Books, and it's near McAllister College, and he's proud to say, I'm losing my fortune selling books, but we need a good bookstore before they're all gone. So he does lots of little appearances, so... if you ask again, he just might take you up on it.
Excellent.
If you're in St. Paul for a while longer, you might want to take a cruise, something you could also have done in Minneapolis. There's lots of boat lines around, but right there in downtown St. Paul, on the river, of course, you could hop on the Jonathan Paddleford or a few of the other sort of good old-fashioned steamboats, and you can go into the night and hear Dixie music, or you can just do a shorter scenic one. There's also, if you're coming in the summer, Harriet Island across from downtown St. Paul with gorgeous views of St. Paul. Well worth walking over there just to take some pictures. But there is a wonderful music festival called the River's Edge, which is going on this summer. There's always been music festivals. They come and go, but this one seems to be picking up steam. And I would highly recommend spending some time on the river. There's even I believe there is still a old boat that has been converted to a restaurant and a B&B. It's only open seasonally, so do your research on that. But it is reputed to have good food. The one that I used to go to all the time when I worked in downtown St. Paul is gone, but there's always someone doing something like that.
And I don't recall, but I want to say that the river is navigable. That's a word I can never say. That you can navigate the river all the way from here down to New Orleans?
You can. You'll have to go through a few locks and things, but yes, you can. And
up to the falls here.
That's right. And I think you can get beyond any falls because the barges run the full distance, with grains and things all the time. It's probably hundreds of thousands of barges run grain and coal and goods and whatnot, and which is a fascinating topic in itself. And I was in New Orleans recently, and really my appreciation for this river that runs through our cities was far more because I did take a riverboat cruise there. But I would recommend a riverboat cruise here and take a look at that river. And since we're in St. Paul, one more stop, if you have time, is our state capitol is in St. Paul, and it's a gorgeous building inside and out. And most people don't know it, but there's a wonderful little restaurant downstairs. I think it's called the Rothscheller or something, and it has kind of a German feel to it. And yes, you can get tap beers, I recall.
I would guess that would be Rathskeller.
Yes, depending on who says it, I guess. But you'll see some politicians down there, and one of them is Ellen Page, who is a Supreme Court justice here and played for the Minnesota Vikings back in the Purple People Eater days. And last time I had lunch there, he was sitting at the table next to me, so that was kind of fun, too. If you have more time in St. Paul, there are a few neighborhoods worth checking out. You must take a drive down Summit Avenue. This is where all the historic mansions are, and it's just kind of jaw-dropping, mansion after mansion after mansion. The James J. Hill House is open to the public, and he was the railroad baron that helped found St. Paul and make it happen, and that is a huge building, well worth touring if you have time. Summit Avenue is also where F. Scott Fitzgerald hung out, and as you walk around, you can, if you've read his books, especially The Great Gatsby and such, you can sort of feel his ghost and probably find a statue about him. Garrison Keillor, I believe, still lives on Summit Avenue. And nearby is Cathedral Hill, just a few blocks off Summit Avenue, and that has a wonderful little neighborhood with a great restaurant and bar called W.A. Frost. Across the street from that is Moscow on the Hill. You can guess what kind of food they serve. And just a few blocks over is another long, long avenue, well worth checking out, called Grand Avenue. It is very grand, full of shops, restaurants, bars, nightclubs, and houses, too. Some gorgeous houses on it. So St. Paul has old-world charm in a way that Minneapolis doesn't, and the cities truly are very different, and they deserve their own days.
Excellent. Where to next?
So if you're game, I'll take us out of town on day 4.
Absolutely.
So if you have a 4th day, and I hope you do, you certainly could stay in the Twin Cities and mishmash any of those things I've been talking about, but I think it's important if you're in the Twin Cities that you save a day, or part of a day anyway, to get out of town. And I mean that in the best possible way. I probably have 5 scenarios worth mentioning that I can keep brief, but they're my favorites. The first would be to take a full day on Lake Minnetonka, which I talked about as a suburb of Minneapolis that's easy to get to, but you certainly could spend the whole day out there, and if you rent a pontoon, you usually get it from 7 in the morning till sundown, so you could be on the boat all day and just stop in the little towns, dock up here and there, toss anchor here and there, or do my favorite thing, and that's just float and listen to music and drink beer and listen to a Twins game. But other scenarios very close by, within about a half hour, is a small town called Stillwater, and this is on the St. Croix River, another river that runs through the area. And Stillwater has a lot of history and charm, and needless to say, some bars and restaurants and shops and galleries. You can get a river cruise of the St. Croix River out of Stillwater, or you can rent a kayak or canoe or another boat out of there or other places. You can even go places where they will take you in a van and drop you however far you want and let you float or kayak or canoe down back to Stillwater or some of the other towns that offer this, and that is a great way to spend the day. And this river is wild and beautiful. It's been very preserved. Not many homes, not many towns. But back to Stillwater, if you're there, I would also recommend that you taste some wine. We have gotten quite serious about trying to make wine here in the area, and the University of Minnesota has spent millions and millions of dollars in research, and Stillwater has some local little wineries there that you can taste the wine, and one of them even has a rooftop place where you can get food and buy your bottle of wine and go stare at that river. And there's some wonderful restaurants right on the river where you can hang out and sip while you watch the boats go by and stare at the beautiful old bridge. So Stillwater's one very good scenario. I think another one that also is on the St. Croix River, and this one we're going to go to Wisconsin now. Wisconsin is, we like to think of as a suburb of Minnesota, I suppose, but of course I jest. But Hudson, Wisconsin is just over the river. You'll go from St. Paul on 94, and it's a fairly scenic drive, and you'll cross the river, and there is Hudson. And Hudson has lots of things to do, and more places to rent boats, and more cruise ships, and probably a little bit more of a gritty feel than Stillwater, which is kind of refined and rich, but I mean gritty in a good way. You can find a lot of variety there. There are old bars, and there are biker bars, and there are rock and roll bars, and yet you can find fabulousness too. And that's Hudson, Wisconsin, well worth spending some time. A little further outside of town now, so you're going to need a car, or you're going to have to be an awfully good biker, but Pepin, Minnesota, is on the Minnesota side of the Mississippi River, and it's a wonderful town that takes about 90 minutes to get through to, and is a gorgeous drive, and you'll go through wonderful river towns like Prescott, which is a bigger sort of real functioning city, but outside of the cities, and then a little further on down you'll go through practically a little theme park, a very sweet town called Stockholm, which of course is Swedish and has an Ingebretsson's store there and a Swedish bakery and real Swedish tradition and sort of a little Stockholm feeling to it. And continue all the way and you'll get to Pepin, which is a wonderful little town, and you can drive up on the bluffs and just see forever. And Pepin is a very wide part of the river, so they actually call it Lake Pepin, and you'll see some sailboats and you'll see some fishermen and you'll see some water skiers and a little bit of everything. If you want to, you can cross a bridge and get to lots of towns like Lake City and Red Wing and take your options that way. Or something I think is really cool is you can get on the Amtrak in St. Paul and go to Red Wing and spend the day there and take the same Amtrak back when it's coming back from Chicago. You'll load it at 10:30 or 11. Frankly, it's always running late, but you'll probably get on at about 7:30 in the morning, and you can spend 16 hours getting lost renting a bike in one of the river towns that it goes through, Red Wing probably being the most obvious choice, and lots to do there, and then take the train back again at night, which is a real cool way. And that train route shows a lot of neat things you would never see otherwise because you're going right alongside the river and crossing the river a few times. But if you're back in Pepin, Lake Pepin, there is lots of things to do there, and probably the most famous restaurant there is called the Harbor View Cafe, and it's one of the most noted restaurants in Minnesota. Doesn't take reservations, but it's quite large, and it's not open all year round, and it's not open every day, so do your research. But the food is great, and you're surrounded by shelves full of books, and you're looking out, if you get the right table, out at the river, and it's a great place to just spend some time. And if you want to spend the night there, there's countless B&Bs, and of course, if you've heard of Airbnb now, which is a wonderful site that you can find somewhere to stay pretty much anywhere. So that is, I suppose, the fourth option that I would mention, and then the fifth, and now you're needing even more time, so probably going to need to spend a night there, but it can be done as a day trip, and that is to Duluth. Duluth is probably 2 hours away if you drive like I do, and most people do. And then you get to see Lake Superior, which is the largest freshwater lake in the world, and is just a stunning sight. And you can go a little outside of Duluth on a scenic road, and there's two great restaurants worth the drive just outside of Duluth. But if you're in Duluth, you can go to Canal Park. You can go to a big beach in a shallow part of the lake called Park Point and have a swim, and the water is actually warm for that lake anyway because it's so shallow, especially in the summer. It's a quite easy swim. The downtown is old and historic, has something for everybody and great nightlife. And Duluth has a blues festival that runs on for days and days, and other festivals also happen at that outside venue. So Duluth is well worth a day trip. Again, not exactly a suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul, But if you're in the Twin Cities, I hope you'll go see one of the 10,000 lakes or one of the bodies of water. Certainly we have very large resort areas like Brainerd that have hundreds of resorts, from the mom-and-pop old-school ones to very fancy ones with great restaurants and endless holes of golf and such. But we're most known for our lakes, and we bring in millions of tourists a year to take vacations in Minnesota. So the Twin Cities are well worth the time, and you'll see the water here too, but I hope you'll take some time and check out one of those places or find one of your own and see the water and see the beauty and the rolling hills and the farms that we are so proud of here in Minnesota.
Excellent. Well, I think you've covered a lot of the questions I normally ask, so we're not going to do a lot of questions here as we go to wrap this up. I normally ask one warning you would give. I think I would add one, which is 10,000 lakes, you might want to bring mosquito repellent. That's been at least my experience there in the summertime.
Yes, the mosquito, we call it our state bird, as a matter of fact. The good news is they do a lot to control them, especially in the Twin Cities, where you can do that, and they aren't out all the time, and they aren't out everywhere. But, yeah, be forewarned, you might want some repellent just in case.
Besides the lots of tall blonde women, what's going to surprise somebody who comes to Minnesota?
I think one thing that would surprise people is how contemporary we are, and I use this word cautiously, but rich. We have a very thriving town and state. I say town, but I mean cities. Our unemployment rate never goes as low as the rest of the country. Our people make more money than the rest of the country. We spend more money. So I think you'll be surprised at just how clean and well kept and upscale it is, though not everywhere, and nor should it be. You'll be surprised by how much water there is all over the place. You'll be surprised at the diversity, because some people do think that we're nothing but Scandinavian.
Right.
And you'll be surprised at the sophistication of the people. I mean, we have 3.5 million people here, so we are a city. You can go to a suburb and forget that and feel like you're in a small town, and they even have sort of different accents and things. But a number of things will surprise you, but I think the sophistication and the city-ness of it is probably the simplest way to put it.
When you were mentioning the connection to Prince, I was thinking of when I was in college, there was a folk singer who came from Minnesota who would come out to New York where I was in college. Scott Alaric was his name, and he would talk about misperceptions people had of Minnesota. And they would say something about, do you have rock and roll in Minnesota? And he would say, well, yes, but of course it's not the same without electricity. So he would just
he's a clever man.
Play off of people's misperceptions there. He said he sold somebody a farm right halfway between Minneapolis and St. Paul, which of course would be the middle of the Mississippi River. So
yes,
I did appreciate him talking about some of the misperceptions of Minnesota.
Well, and you brought up music, and that's well worth mentioning too. We have a thriving local music scene here. I couldn't begin to count the bars and venues and festivals. And you can pay nothing and hear a jug band, or you can go next door and pay $100 and see someone who's got a top 40 Billboard hit. And we have great local music, and we are proud of that. You mentioned a folk singer that you follow, and a gentleman named Bob Dylan, of course, came from Minnesota and spent some time in the Twin Cities, and we still think of him as one of our own as well.
And you mentioned festivals. That leads me into the question of, is there one day a year more than any other you think, I'm so glad I live in Minnesota?
Yes, I would have to say probably for me it's the summer solstice. It's June 21st, so it is the longest day, and we love the long days here, and I'm not exaggerating. It will be light at 5 in the morning, and it will be light at 11 at night. It's hard to go to sleep, and if it's a nice day, June usually is. It could be iffy. July is the perfect month here, I suppose, but the solstice is a celebration, and the long days are so much fun, and I like to spend the entire day outside on the 21st, and lots of people do, and there are festivals. A friend of mine golfs all day from sunup to sundown. I could never do that, but I might be in a boat all day. And, of course, the Scandinavians also celebrate the summer solstice and the long days, so that's something that came from there and is a lot of fun, and you just feel awfully happy to be here on that day.
And I'm guessing that the fact that you are a lover of the outdoors is one of the reasons we're not spending a lot of time talking about the Mall of America.
No, that's true. I'm a lover of the outdoors. I'm very fortunate that I live on a lake, and it has a 1929 boathouse right on the water where I'm talking to you from and where my office is, and I can have my kayak out in 1 minute and kayak pretty much every day. When it's not frozen, and I'll even go out when it's frozen if there's a patch of water. So yes, I think all Minnesotans love the outdoors. We do a good job of trying to stay in shape, and lots of people have family cabins, and lots of people camp and bike and rollerblade and do, you name the sport that involves being outdoors, and we do it. Not to forget fishing, which people still do too. I'm looking at fishermen as I'm speaking to you. No, I didn't mention the Mall of America, and they do deserve a mention because it really is a pretty cool place, and frankly, it's one of the biggest tourist attractions in the country, and it probably is, I'm sure it's the biggest one in Minnesota. Brings in millions of people a year, so we're grateful for that, because it brings people to Minnesota. And I don't think you'd come to the Twin Cities and stay at the Mall of America the whole time. You're going to need to go see some lakes, and you're going to need to go downtown when you're done shopping.
Excellent. 3 more questions. One, you're standing at the prettiest spot in the Twin Cities. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Well, that is a good one. I probably have a bias to Lake Calhoun on a very nice summer day, and I did talk about that earlier. It's just so magical to see all these people having fun, sailing, windsurfing, canoeing, kayaking, rollerblading, biking, having a picnic. Over here, a couple people playing guitars. There was one person who had a website about this. He would set up a table and 2 chairs and a sign that said free conversation. And people would stop because he thinks the world is becoming too digital and people are staring at their screens, which I agree with. And people would stop and talk to him, and he would write up on his log the conversations that he had with people, and he considers himself an introvert. But Lake Calhoun is so beautiful, and you can see the skyline from points. There are parks you can throw a frisbee. You're going to see some ducks and geese and loons and wildlife. And the water is sparkling, and the sun is out, and the clouds look like popcorn. And I used to live near that lake and pretty much go there every day. And even in the winter, I would go there to skate or to cross-country ski. And it's just got nature, it's got people, it's got city, it's got everything at once. But you can look at that water and the clouds and be anywhere, including, heaven as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent. Last 2 questions. Finish this sentence. You really know you're in the Twin Cities when what?
That's a tough one. I'm going to give you 2 answers, and you can use them both or choose one. But you really know you're in the Twin Cities when you see Peanuts statues, because in downtown St. Paul, every handful of years they will cast a new Peanuts character and make dozens of very nice statues of Lucy or Snoopy or Charlie Brown or Schroeder, etc. And then they will have a fundraiser, and they will have artists paint these and do something with their art style to these statues and then sell them as a fundraiser, and businesses will buy them and put them out on the streets.
Okay, so this is the same as the Bulls in Chicago or...
I suppose so, yes.
The Hearts in San Francisco, or... Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
But it's Peanuts characters done sometimes pretty traditionally, sometimes done in a wild, artistic style. And as you walk down the streets, you'll see them all over the place. And if you didn't know you were going to be there, it would make you laugh out loud. They're very charming. The other thing, you're in the Twin Cities, I would have to say friendly people, and that's what visitors always say to me here. We're still in the Midwest. A lot of us came from smaller towns and other states, including myself. I grew up in Iowa. And we are very delighted to have a tourist and someone who comes up and says, can you tell me how to get to? Or even the waitresses and waiters and people who take your money. Certainly you're going to find a snarky person or a person with attitude here and there. But for the most part, we are happy, friendly people. We are Midwesterners. We are farm stock. We are polite to one another, and I'm not saying we're the only city that's that way, but I get that comment all the time from people who come here. They're just shocked by how people will go out of their way to help you and be friendly and just genuinely be polite and smiley.
And I would have to recommend along those lines, if you want to prepare for your trip, there's a book called How to Speak Minnesotan that teaches you some of the proper etiquette, how when you're offered dessert you need to turn it down, I think, twice before you accept it, and how when you leave somebody's house you have to say goodbye, I believe, a number of times on the way to the curb. Otherwise, people wonder how you were offended if you said goodbye and left. And just a little different, a little slower in
That's
terms
right.
of culturally. Polite isn't quite it either. Friendly, I think, is really the way it captures it.
Sometimes it's polite, sometimes it's friendly, but you go drive in a bigger, busier city. Here, we have a problem with merging on the freeways. Everybody does. But it is very common for you to wave somebody through, to let somebody pass you and then make room to let them in. And then you wave thank you back to that person. That tradition is kind of dying off. And pedestrians have the right of way in Minnesota. Cars stop, or at least are supposed to let pedestrians cross. And if you're in the grocery store and someone comes with 10 things they're buying and you have a cart load, 9 out of 10 people here will probably say, oh, you go ahead. And there are little traditions like that. And I know Howard Moore's book, and I've talked with Howard Moore, and you're right. He does a good job of sort of getting you ready for some of these Minnesota traditions.
Excellent. If people wanted to read more about your travels, where should we go?
Well, I have a website called MakeYourBreakaway.com, and I write about my travels in there somewhat, but the concept of the site beyond that is encouraging people to take career breaks and sabbaticals. So it's a why to, how to do that, plus some of my own thinking and topics. And I have taken 4 lengthy career breaks in my life over the past 20 years, ranging from 69 days to 1 year. I did take a whole year off, yes I did. And the last one, however, was just a few years ago. And I took my family of 4, that includes 2 children and my wife, and we went to the Caribbean for 69 days and island hopped. And I have probably, 40 plus blog posts about that, travel logs, and probably 400 pictures. And it's a good site. I'm very proud of it. And some of it's dedicated to travel, and some of it's to bigger trips and bigger topics. But I hope you'll visit MakeYourBreakaway.com.
Excellent. Kirk, thank you very much for coming on the show and sharing with us your obvious love of the Twin Cities.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
In News of the Community had some good feedback on the first half of this 2-part episode. Probably the most articulate was the letter I got from Jamie, and she said, I have to tell you how excited I was to hear the recent Twin Cities episode. It was amazing and covered everything in Minneapolis I could think of. Originally from Minneapolis and an alumni of a little Lutheran college in Minneapolis, the itinerary covered pretty much hit all of the places I took friends to show off the city, even Lake Street and the meat shop. In college, we had a number of international students from Sweden and Norway who shopped there for the things they couldn't live without, like caviar in a tube. As long as I've got you, I might as well rave about the Kunming Yunnan episode. I studied abroad there and found the episode did a great job representing the region. I also studied abroad in Namibia, pre-Brangelina, and have been meaning to add some comments, but need to double-check my facts and maybe run it by friends from the same Center for Global Education program at next month's reunion. I also got to use info learned in your Lanai episode at a recent schmoozing event with a bunch of academic PhD engineer know-it-all types. My amazing Hawaiian experience was great for my husband and I, who were both grad students and on a serious budget at the time, but maybe a little scuzzy to share with the colleagues of my husband. Instead, I got to ask really informed questions about their day trip to Lanai. Thanks so much, Jamie. With that, we're going to bring this episode of The Amateur Traveler to a close. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com or send me an email to host@amateurtraveler.com. You can also participate in the discussion at the Facebook community, facebook.com/amateurtraveler, or follow me on Twitter @Chris2X. And as always, thanks so much for listening.